Hello, my name is Jordan Kareem, and this is my Korean 3415 final project. I chose the movie Man of Will. I chose this film. One, I think it just kind of resonated with me. It was probably one of the films that I actually enjoyed watching for the class the most, and it does a good job combining like a personal transformation with Korean national struggle, and then also kind of just having a big amount of heart. And I think it is a really underrated movie and an underrated look into Korean history. So most people in Korea know Kim Koo as like a national hero, but this movie kind of goes deeper into like who he was before the legend, and it kind of gives like an origin story that was really really powerful, focusing on a moment in his youth that kind of just shaped everything that he became after. And this is my analysis on it. So, looking at fast facts, the film was directed by Lee Wan Tae, and it was released in 2017. It runs about 2 hours, and it focuses entirely on Kim Koo's time in prison, which is long before his political fame. It's definitely like a unique and rare biopic that doesn't really rush through his life, but instead focuses on one key chapter of his life and dives really deep into this chapter of his life and how it affected every other part of his life, which is really cool. I think that focus on that specific part in his life made the film more intimate, and it made every single scene, every single moment, every single story a lot more meaningful for me. And that's where I really, really like what the director did with this film. Key cast, you have Chu Jin Woong, sorry, that plays Kim Chang Soo, which is the younger version of Kim Koo, and he kind of carries the film with this calm and intensity. And Song Seong Hyun, oh my god, I can't say the name, I'm sorry, but he plays the cruel prison director, and like they really had a fun, interesting dynamic in the movie. It was kind of like they were doing like they had a chess match going on from a mental standpoint and a moral standpoint, and I love that. I think the cast also had a big difference. They made a big difference in the movie because without strong acting, this movie definitely could have been dry and boring, but instead, the performances in the movie gave it real emotional weight, and it made it really, really strong, and I just fell in love with it watching it. So it was a great movie, and it had great actors. So now looking at the crime that changed everything in 1896, just a year after Empress Myeong Song was assassinated by Japanese agents, Kim murdered a Japanese man in retribution, and he believed he was protecting his country, and he immediately turned himself in with a written confession, which shocked me. I was like, why is he turning himself in? But most films would kind of glorify revenge, but this one doesn't do that. It kind of focuses on responsibility, and it made me think about how young people take justice into their own hands when their country is under attack. So, Kim, oh, yeah, hold on. Okay, yep. So now talking about life in prison, Kim is sent to Incheon prison, where most of the inmates are poor and illiterate Koreans. What hit me hardest was how Kim doesn't break. Like he never broke in prison. He became a teacher, and he started educating the guards, the other prisoners. It was cool. It was really powerful to see somebody, take being sentenced to jail and do that with it. The film also showed that resistance isn't always about fighting, shooting people, invading people's land, bombing people. It can also be about giving people knowledge, educating people, having people have their dignity, and giving people confidence. And it kind of made me reflect on how leadership often starts in the darkest places. Leadership isn't just jolly and happy and always positive all the time. Leadership comes from struggle. Leadership comes from obstacle. Leadership comes from triumph. And it was really, really cool to see that side of leadership in this movie. I loved it, and it was so powerful, and it was awesome to see on screen. So labor and escape. So later on, Kim is sent to do hard labor, which is, that's tough. Laying down railway lines, and that kind of symbolized, Japan just having growing control over Korea. And, the conditions are brutal. But I think what's kind of surprised me was how the movie builds hope even in that moment. Like when Kim is finally released, he escapes thanks to like the quiet support of the people that that he inspired. And I think that scene was really cool because it felt like this quiet victory in this just violent and cruel world. So now moving into the historical context, in the late 1800s, Korea was kind of collapsing under pressure, and China, Russia, and especially Japan were all fighting to have as much influence as they possibly could. And the assassination of Empress Myeong-song in 1895 was definitely a turning point, and people like him were deeply affected in their life. And this movie helps explain why so many Koreans later on became independence fighters. I thought the historical context, the historical setting was one of the movie's strongest points, and it helps modern audiences feel what Koreans are up against. Now, fact versus fiction. Of course, some parts of the movie are slightly fictionalized. Historians say the man Kim killed probably wasn't connected to the Empress's death, and his time on the railways may not have happened exactly like how it did in the movie. But I think the emotional truth still comes true. The director, he used his creative license to highlight injustice, and I think it works as a film. I also think it made the story more focused and symbolic, even if some details weren't exact. Okay, so when it comes to themes and cinematic style, the movie's biggest theme is that education is power. Kim teaches his fellow prisoners to read, and I think that kind of transforms and changes everything. Another theme is that resistance can start quietly and not with violence, but with integrity. The tone kind of reminded me of like Shawshank Redemption when it came to like the prison scenes a little bit. The film kind of uses warm lighting and emotional music to build hope, even in really, really tough moments. And I love how it balanced realism with inspiration. Now looking at it from a reception and box office standpoint, Man of Will made about $2.7 million and opened the third in the Korean box office behind The Outlaws. It wasn't a blockbuster movie, but being honest, it really wasn't meant to be if you're looking at it. Critics liked the acting, but thought the script was a little bit uneven. And personally, I think its strength is in how focused it is on that one aspect of his life. And I think it tells one story really well instead of trying to cover Kim's entire life. I think a blockbuster could have been his entire life. But, I think this specific film, it was a great piece. And it was something that was beautiful to watch. Why watch? I think even if you kind of know nothing about Korea, I think the film will definitely make you care. It's about identity, it's about sacrifice, and it's about, the power of one person to create change in the world. And I think you'll leave knowing a little bit more about Korean history, and I think you'll definitely feel something. For me, it redefined what a historical drama could be. It's personal, it's emotional, and it's deeply human, and I love that about it. So, yeah, that's my review. I wanted to say I love this class. Lastly, I didn't really think that I would, fall in love with this class, but I really did. I love watching the movies. I love kind of, getting to analyze the movies. I love stories, so I've been writing. I write I've been writing ever since I was a kid. So I love to write little stories in my journal, little short stories, and I've been doing it for years. I never actually wrote a book or published anything, but I've always just had a love for storytelling. My mom's a speech language pathologist, but she loves reading, so I've always had, and she loves reading and writing and storytelling, so I've always kind of been into storytelling. So it was really cool to just experience this class. I loved you as a teacher. I loved, getting to do their little daily assignments. It was a fun part of my summer, just getting to watch something cool and, talk about it. So I really enjoyed the class. I loved it, and I'm very thankful that I actually did this because it was just something to step out of my comfort zone. Not really step out of my comfort zone, but it's just something different and kind of going into something that I've kind of had a passion for that I haven't really explored. So thank you so much, and I really appreciated this class.